For tens of thousands of years, humanity looked up at the stars and wondered what messages the flickering lights held. It wasn't until people began to settle across those stars that they realized they weren't messages, but opportunities. Within the constellation Taurus, a cluster of stars known as Hyades offered one of the most lucrative opportunities ever tackled. Within these star systems were resource-rich worlds which provided the building blocks for a new system and arguably a new civilization. It was not one bound by the bitter rivalries of the past, but rather something new that offered great prosperity and stability as an alternative to the countless generations of continued conflict. The Taurian Concordat is more than just a periphery state. It's the successful implementation of ideas outside the influence of the great houses of the inner sphere, and a continuing assertion that there is value in independence and autonomy. The Taurians have had to fight throughout their history to preserve it, and every sign suggests they will continue to fight well into the Ilclan era. When the Hyades cluster was first settled by Samantha Calderon's fleet following its discovery in 2253, the settlers were blown away by the habitable and resource-rich worlds. Taking advantage of every opportunity, the Taurians prospered and populations grew. The government, built upon a constitutional monarchy, was stable, and the citizenry benefited from guaranteed rights and privileges that peoples from the inner sphere houses definitely would not. Wealth and population growth fueled the expansion across the Hyades system and even further across the periphery. The Concordat has proven time and time again that they can resist the pressure of the inner sphere politically and militarily while not sacrificing their principles in the process. That being said, even Samantha Calderon had to admit that sometimes survival required bending your morals a bit in the face of a world-ending threat. As the Taurian-controlled region continued to grow, it inevitably came into contact with worlds claimed by the Federated Suns, Capellan Confederation, and the Magistracy of Canopus. All of them would test the resolve of the Taurians, and it became obvious that if the Concordat was going to survive, they needed to be able to hit back as hard as they were hit. As BattleTech designs started to filter through the inner sphere in legal and less than legal ways, the Taurians obtained their blueprints by playing up their status as a neutral state beyond the trials and tribulations of the inner sphere. Refugees from House Davion, Liao, and the Free Worlds League showed up, and some of them brought industrial plans, blueprints, and scientific knowledge that would help the Concordat stay militarily competitive. The reunification war between the Periphery states and the Terran Alliance was devastating for many Periphery worlds. Though the Concordat held out and did better than most, 1 in 5 Taurians still died in the conflict, and even after years of brutal war, the Taurians refused to give up their dream of being free and independent. Forced under the rule of the Star League, the Taurians bided their time, rebuilt, and looked for another opportunity to rise up. With the eventual collapse of that Star League and the beginning of the First Succession War, they acted quickly to reassert their destiny for self-rule. Though generally spared from the widespread destruction and misery of the Succession Wars, the Taurian Concordat still felt the impact through reduced trade, a lack of goods from inner sphere sources, and an erosion of technology. Concern over House Davion, always seen as a looming threat, had a tendency to lead domestic and foreign policy right up through the clan invasion and the creation of the Federated Commonwealth. Plenty of time and energy was spent in streamlining and eliminating waste in the Tauran defense forces. These reforms were typically coupled with plentiful defense spending packages. Only the death of Thomas Calderon in 3055 would allow for a reduction in tensions and a softening of the near-constant war footing aimed at House Davion. As a result, political ties were created and grew within the Magistracy of Canopus as well as the Capellan Confederation. During the Word of Blake's war against everyone, the Taurian Concordat took the opportunity to expand by taking territory from House Davion. More than a dozen systems were brought into the Taurian fold, including the regionally important planets of the Pleiades cluster. The years 3079 through 3085 were the peak of expansion and control over systems around Taurus. Since then, through the Dark Age and into the Ilclan era, the Taurians have suffered significant setbacks due to secessionist movements, unfortunate military moves, and political infighting. Thankfully for the Taurians, the last few years have seen a resurgence. Taurians are looking forward to the wedding between Revadoru, the daughter of the Taurian Concordat Protector Cafdoru, and Bryant Calderon, son of Calderon Protectorate Protector Sam Calderon, which is slated to take place in 3157. This union promises to bring systems back into the Taurian fold and boost the trade and defense of all involved. The breakaway Calderon Protectorate and the Taurians have been in a tense standoff for years, and the possibility of peace was also an opportunity to shift Taurian military forces to new operating theaters. Federated Sun's assets in the Periphery March are very likely future targets should the Taurians want to flex their might and bring planets back into the fold. The disastrous recent attack by Duke Alexander Hasek on the Taurian Concordat may end up being a boon, as Hasek's embarrassing capture and ransoming back to the Davions has significantly harmed the reputation of the once great house. If Protector Doru can capitalize on his victory and secure his control over existing assets, there's little reason why the Taurian Concordat couldn't continue to grow and be a major regional player well into the Oakland era. The Taurian Defense Force continues to hold the reputation as one of the best trained and well-equipped Periphery militaries. The Taurian history of national service as well as pride in their country has contributed to a sense of responsibility. While the ruling Calderon family has had trials and tribulations concerning lineage and determining who gets to hold that protectorship, the Taurian Defense Force has not been blemished by it. Most of the active Taurian Defense Force, or TDF for short, is stationed on the border worlds with neighboring states. Up to 2 battalions at a time are rotated out on a regular basis for patrols and regular pirate hunting duty. The TDF units are trained to operate in a flexible manner using tactics that fit with whatever arms and forces that are available, as the spread-out nature of the TDF prevents quick reinforcements. Infantry and armored vehicle units train and operate together regularly, but without the need for aerospace or battle mech support, which may not always be available. As hinted at earlier, one of the TDF's greatest strengths is, interestingly, the smallest unit. The TDF soldier is loyal, determined, and intensely devoted to protecting the Taurian Concordat. They're known for fighting fiercely on the battlefield and not giving ground when the conscripts from other nations would buckle and flee, or surrender. It is the legacy of so many brutal conflicts with the Inner Sphere, and one that continues to frustrate House Davion in recent times. Even in the case that you do defeat a Taurian garrison and force a planet under your rule, the prospect of trying to govern over the hostile population is sure to be a drain on resources. A humorous piece of Taurian graffiti reads, "It's not so much that the damn Davions keep crossing the borders and destroying our homes all the time, it's that their tank shells are all covered with quotations from Michael Hasek Davion." Of course, the Taurian Concordat is more than just a rough and tumble military backed by heavy industry. Taurians take pride in an educational system that has forged the highest literacy rate across the Periphery states, and is higher than that of several of the Inner Sphere houses. Though many of the institutions of higher learning were often targets for destruction in wars with the Terran Alliance and the SLDF, they were always quickly rebuilt. Universities can be found on a half-dozen planets, and they graduate tens of thousands of skilled Taurians each year. The government can be described as a constitutional monarchy, though it's much more restrained than other examples in the Inner Sphere. Free speech and media independence is generally respected even during times of conflict, which is much more than can be said for most states in the galaxy. There's an emphasis on the protection of individual rights, which is both a legacy of their Periphery heritage as well as a bulwark against the establishment of a fascist police state. The Taurians also benefit from an extensive social support system including pensions, state-run healthcare, and living allowances. There's also a system set up to support family members when someone dies in service to the state. The Taurian government takes a laissez-faire approach to the economy except for extraordinary circumstances when there's a risk of inflation or economic depression. Free trade is the norm within the Concordat and other Periphery states, though there is still a social pressure, if not outright taboo, against becoming too economically dependent upon trade with the Inner Sphere houses. This has historically hobbled the Taurian development, but it has been seen as a wise decision overall to prevent becoming a serf state to a great house through economic manipulation. Major industries include mineral extraction, refining, military hardware production, and consumer goods. If there's a theme to be found here when discussing the Taurian government, it's that it exists to serve the people, rather than the people existing to serve the government. Sounds nice, right? It's interesting to note that the Taurians do have a state religion, though participation is not required. Deism, which is a religious view that there is a god who created the universe, but he does not interfere with it post-creation, is a legacy view dating back many centuries before the ships first landed on Taurus. Two philosophical camps have grown in prominence in Taurian society over the past few hundred years. The first, known as the Farlookers, advocate for a much more active state which could expand the borders of the Concordat primarily on the edge of known space, rather than through direct conflict with neighboring states. The other camp is known as the Inheritors, who generally accept the views of the Farlookers, but then take it even further to suggest that the Inner Sphere is on the edge of calamity, and it will be the role of the Taurians to act as saviors who can protect civilization in the aftermath by settling in amongst the remnants of the Inner Sphere houses. I find it interesting how that Inheritor view sounds a lot like the Warden clan view. Before we wrap things up here, I do want to point out a couple of interesting planets from within the Taurian Concordat. Taurus, of course, is the capital world, as it boasts a population of more than 2 billion people. It's a good reminder that there are worlds out there in the periphery which aren't just backwater colonies struggling to survive. Taurus has thriving BattleTech production lines and is a center of cultural expression for the rest of the Concordat. The planet is protected in part by a thick asteroid field in-system, which is not only a source of mineral wealth, but also an operating theater for the Tauran Defense Force. New Vandenberg is one of the most important Concordat planets, with a population of more than 1.3 billion citizens. It was the center of brutal and long-lasting fighting during the Unification War, and the lessons learned have been carried forward in both large permanent TDF garrisons, as well as cities that are designed around the construction of defensive fortification networks. The planet has a thriving defense industry which supplies not just the planet but the TDF and beyond. And beyond the focus of military and defensive needs, New Vandenberg also has many nature preserves that protect a plethora of avian species not found anywhere else in the periphery. The planet Brisbane stands out as an interesting site as it's largely an oceanic world. Though it does have a population of over 15 million people, those settlements are located in small island chains. Brisbane is the source of significant quantities of purified water and marine foodstuffs. Due to the overwhelming majority of the planet being covered by ocean, much of the TDF defenses on the planet are naval, which is kind of cool. It's a good reminder that there are many different types of worlds out there that don't just look like Terra. I'm excited to see where the Taurian Concordat goes from here as we move deeper into the Ill-Clan era. With the Inner Sphere houses in disarray and renewed focus on Terra, it's quite likely that the Taurians will have some breathing room to expand and develop further. We know House Davion isn't going to be running any operations against them anytime soon after the events from Dominion Divided. The future looks bright for the Taurian Concordat, so long as they can unify their interests and prevent the internal strife which has played out in so many other states in this tumultuous time. I, for one, cannot wait to find out what happens next. If you enjoyed this video, hit all the buttons, and perhaps share it with someone else who might get a kick out of it. I feel tremendously blessed to be able to dig through the old and new source books for fun little trinkets of information for you. Big thanks to the Ko-Fi folk who are directly helping making these videos happen. And next on the slate is a Magistracy of Canopus video, which I know from friends and Twitter folk that many people are eager to see. Until then, take care and go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.